Hi folks, I'm Rob Purdy and welcome to Blast and Cast Men's Ministry Video Training Library. The vision is that we'll have a library filled with training videos that you can access at any time and go through our training. So now, let's get into the training.
All right, this is our third video training for Blast and Cast Men's Ministries. And we really designed this training so that guys that can't be here in Baytown, Texas at a random time, or even make one of our weekend trips at Proctor or Houma or the Baytown area, can still have access to training videos. So the first couple of videos that we did are very basic on the gospel and then on spiritual growth, because one, if you don't understand the gospel, and then two, if you're not growing spiritually, then all the rest of the training videos don't matter. You're not going to get anything from them. Because we don't need to teach you about evangelism if you don't understand the gospel in the first place. And then you're not going to actually do anything with evangelism if you're not growing spiritually. Because evangelism is really a result of A, understanding the gospel, and then B, growing spiritually and starting to use it to act on the gospel. So if you're not there yet, don't skip ahead. Don't skip to the evangelism stuff and get to the practical advice, because you can't skip. You're not going to get anywhere in your spiritual life if you're skipping ahead. So this lesson is going to be on evangelism. Now, evangelism is what we're all about in Blast and Cast. We are a missions organization, so evangelism is very important to us. The problem is, evangelism is a big, scary word. And we kind of think that it's better suited for some other guy like Pastor Rob or Brodie or somebody that maybe has a spiritual gift of evangelism, which I'd like to point out that neither Rob or I have that spiritual gift. Or perhaps you just have experience speaking in public, or you know a lot of answers to questions. That's not what evangelism is. That's not biblical. So we've got to break down this topic of evangelism. We've got to make it more simple. So for this lesson, what I really want to do is give you a framework, a mental framework to understand evangelism, or to re-understand evangelism, if you will. I've got three main goals for this lesson. One, I want to demonstrate how and why evangelism, and really discipleship too for that matter, happens best within the scope of a long-term relationship rather than a one-time conversation or even a 30-minute sermon. Second, I want to discuss how a commitment to simple but long-term relational goals, both at home and at work, leads to a life that's simple yet fulfilling. And then third, I want to provide some practical, open-ended questions that are going to help you be more purposeful and dive deeper into relationships. So if I've got to sum that up in 3 words, I'm going to say long-term, and then I'm going to say simple and deeper. You really want to know what makes evangelism effective, and you just think about those 3 topics. All right, so my background is with Campus Crusade for Christ. Some of you guys know that, some of you don't. I graduated from the University of Houston. It was what we called a catalytic school. In other words, we had no staff members on the University of Houston campus. It was all student-led. We did ourselves. We had a team of student leaders. We went through a lot of training, particularly evangelism training, but we also did a lot of leadership training. Our evangelism model basically revolved around knocking on dorm room doors. Starting conversations with someone we've never met before, typically used a 4 spiritual laws tract, which was, it was pretty effective. It made it easy to understand the gospel. It almost always included an immediate challenge to make a decision about what they just heard. Traditional evangelism models taught really since about the 1950s in America, as best I can tell, revolve around that singular discussion, one-time conversation, like knocking on a dorm room door on a college campus or knocking on a random door in your neighborhood. Witnessing to strangers that you'll probably never see again, or perhaps hosting large meetings in football stadiums or at a church or something like that where you have special speakers. A lot of times they revolve around gospel tracts or something that's designed to kind of make it easy for you to get through that conversation or to give yourself a bullet point. There's almost always an immediate challenge to make a decision about Jesus right then. Well, between my junior and senior year of college, I worked for Campus Crusade in East Asia. Now, I did what's called a stint. It was a short-term internship, a one-year internship, and East Asia was just basically a code name because it was a country I can't say the name of because we weren't supposed to be there as missionaries. It was a closed communist country, so we went in as students, and we did missions in secret, so to speak. We learned how to speak in code because we couldn't use spiritual terms out in public. So we had code words for all kinds of spiritual words that we could talk to our teammates. We had to watch our security, particularly when we were doing evangelism, when we were trying to meet people and meeting with nationals there, and especially when a national did become a believer, we had to really watch their security for them. We had to protect those that we were reaching because if authorities found out, there would be negative consequences. We had a 6-week rule that was in effect. And basically, we could not share the gospel with someone for 6 weeks after we'd met them. That sounds very, very foreign to us in America who are going around knocking on dorm room doors, sharing the gospel with strangers and making an immediate challenge. We had to ask spiritual questions. We kind of had a list of spiritual questions that we needed to ask. Then we would discuss their answers. We'd go back with our team members and we'd discuss those answers, and we'd have to get the approval of our team leader before we could actually share the gospel with someone out on campus. Well, what it forced us to do was that we learned to build relationships in a way that laid the groundwork for successful evangelism. We had 6 weeks to do it. So we asked lots of questions, lots. We got to know them inside and out as a result of those questions. And a lot of that was intelligence gathering just so that we could get approval from our team leader to share the gospel in the first place. When we did share the gospel, we had to be really careful about being too forceful with a challenge because if they got offended by it, they could turn us in. So we had to be very cautious with that. We learned to challenge them to make a decision not when it was convenient for us or when we wanted them to make a decision. We learned to withhold that challenge until it most benefited them to make a decision because they were ready for it. They had the understanding that was necessary. They knew what they were in for if they made a positive decision. And if they made a negative decision, they also understood the consequences of that. The decision that they had to make was dangerous to them. And they needed to understand that decision fully before they made it. See, in countries around the world that are closed to Christian missionaries, such as communist or even primarily Muslim countries, evangelism can be quite dangerous. It's usually not legal. Believers in closed countries often speak in code and they meet in secret. They don't have 1,500 people plus churches that are meeting out in public. Failure to exercise caution in evangelism in those countries results in security concerns for both Christians and those who desire to become Christians. Believers in closed countries, they learn to build strategic relationships with non-believers over time. And a strategic approach to relationship building, we've learned, lays the groundwork for successful evangelism. You gather intelligence. You ask lots of questions. You learn about their past. You learn about their present. You get to know them inside and out. Figure out what motivates them. Figure out what fears they may have. And then all of that is done to assess their current spiritual condition and then learn how to present the gospel in the way that most relates to them and will be most effective in reaching that particular individual. Because the gospel and God's love for us is incredibly specific and individual to each of us. He doesn't see us as part of a crowd. He calls us out individually. Now let's step back a little bit. Look at the big picture here. What's the goal of evangelism? When you participate in evangelism, what are you actually trying to accomplish? I think for most of us, what we want to do is we want to bring someone to Jesus. We want them to understand the gospel. That's kind of our goal going into it. But say that happens. We bring them to Jesus. They understand the gospel. Then what? What's next? Does the person that made that decision, do they really understand what they're in for? Do they understand that Jesus said that anyone that would follow after him should pick up their cross daily, deny themselves, and follow him? Picking up crosses isn't fun. It's sacrificial. It involves pain and hardship and difficult decisions. Do they understand the inherent difficulty that comes along with a decision to follow Jesus? Do they understand, and this is a big one in America today, do they understand that following Jesus won't make their life easier? And it won't make their problems go away? Do they understand that following Jesus is likely going to be the hardest thing that they ever do in their life? Because I don't hear that in many Christian messages today in America. But if they don't understand that, are they making a real decision to follow Jesus? Evangelism training since the 1950s has revolved around one conversation, an immediate challenge. But can one conversation fully prepare someone for a lifetime of self-denial and difficult decisions? I say no. I don't think so. In East Asia, we invested weeks and months in relationships with non-believers. We had countless conversations that were planned out ahead of time. They were bathed in prayer, not just by me, but by an entire team every time we had an important conversation. And they were designed to carefully lead someone to Jesus via a long-term relationship. Now, there were only a few converts, but what we saw is that of those few converts, an extraordinarily high percentage of those men and women went on to become genuine Jesus followers. In the U.S., we're trying to do all that with one conversation, an hour with somebody at most, or maybe just one 30-minute sermon from a popular speaker that we brought in that you'll never meet again in the rest of your life. Now, there may be many converts, and we may stack up the numbers, and American churches really like to stack up numbers. But how many of them are actually going on to become Jesus followers? Statistics in modern day tell us that not very many. In fact, even the numbers of people in America that even call themselves Christian is dropping at an alarming rate. It was about 80% 12 years ago, and I'm now seeing something like only 67% in America today, and that's some numbers that I've just seen within the last few days. So in 12 years, the number that even call themselves Christians has dropped at that rate. But the number of Christians that are actually Jesus followers, that don't just call themselves Christians, I've seen numbers that are in the single digits in America. So something is broken with our model. At Blast and Cast, what we've done is taken a relational evangelism model and one that was quite literally learned on the other side of the world in foreign missions. And we've adapted it in order to engage a subculture that's been overlooked and underreached by local churches. That subculture is outdoorsmen. We are all about establishing purposeful relationships with the intent of sharing the gospel and creating Jesus followers in the outdoor community. Our events are designed to help create new relationships and to provide a gospel context for those new relationships. Our logo, our merchandise, our video work, our social media presence, it's all designed to help create new relationships and to provide a gospel context for those new relationships. The tournament jerseys, stickers on vehicles, the videos on Facebook, They're all designed to give you guys the opportunity to establish context in your relationship and to have a conversation starter. As in, what's that Blast and Cast logo on your chest? What's that all about? We want you to use that to share the gospel and to change the context of your existing long-term relationship so that you can begin sharing the gospel with those people in effective ways. We want each of our volunteers and our believing participants to become missionaries, to learn how to navigate not only individual conversations, but long-term relationships with the goal of leading those around you to Jesus. Now, we've learned that it takes about 3 years on average, 3 years, for a man to make a meaningful decision. Now, we'll get some people that show up to their first Blast and Cast event and they make a decision. That happens. But what we've seen is that we don't really know if it's a legitimate decision or not and whether they'll see it through. It really takes about 3 years to see if they'll follow up on that decision and actually do the work that it is to become a Jesus follower. All those steps that Pastor Rob just did in the last video about spiritual growth, it takes about 3 years to see if a guy's really going to stick that out and go through some of those steps. Others don't make a decision until after about 3 years. Of those that wait that 3 years to make a decision, a very high percentage, in fact, almost all of them go on to become Jesus followers. And then they, in fact, create other Jesus followers. And a lot of you guys that are going through volunteer training, y'all were one of those guys that waited 3 years and then you jumped in. But when you jumped in, you made an informed decision and it meant something to you. And now you're going through training because you're about bringing other people to Jesus and creating other Jesus followers. In fact, you guys that are watching the videos and you guys that are in the training with us tonight, y'all are proof that this works because you're the product of this process. Our success as a ministry doesn't have anything to do with big names or fancy speakers or witty words or flashy videos or even clever ideas, although I think we have some of all of those things. But it has everything to do with a long-term approach to relationships, a commitment to following Jesus during both good times and bad, and continually sharing the truth of the gospel in all circumstances and seasons of life. The times that really mattered to us as a ministry were the times that we've stood up and we've done something for someone that no one else was willing to do and it just didn't make sense. And when they asked us why we did it, we just shared the gospel with them. We said it's because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. When someone sees that lived out and demonstrated time and time again over a period of years, they have to make a decision. They have to respond. The American church needs to take a step back and completely rethink evangelism. And if we're being honest while we're at it, discipleship too. Matthew 28 says to go and make disciples of all nations. Make disciples. That's what it says we're supposed to do. It does not say make people that agree with us on every detail. Make people that agree with us about abortion. Make people that agree with us about alcohol. Make people that agree with us about politics. All secondary issues, as important as they are. It doesn't say that we should make people who are willing to raise a hand or march down an aisle or go to pray a special prayer with a pastor. Because there is no magical prayer. Successful evangelism creates Jesus followers that follow Jesus in good times and in bad, and then they go on to create additional Jesus followers. That's what making disciples looks like. Really, when you think about it like this, evangelism and discipleship aren't really all that different. And I love this because it simplifies life for me. See, evangelism is all about creating Jesus followers. Discipleship is all about helping people follow Jesus better. Essentially, successful evangelism is leading someone one step closer to Jesus. And then successful discipleship is also leading someone one step closer to Jesus. And you see how this simplifies our interactions with other people and really even our outlook at life. There's minimal difference in the long-term approach to either evangelism and discipleship. Just think about it as leading somebody one step closer to Jesus. Now, let me ask you another question. This is an important question, Tim. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's how you eat an elephant. One bite at a time. You know the biggest mistake that people make when they try to participate in evangelism? They try to eat the whole elephant in an hour. See, making Jesus followers doesn't hinge on one individual conversation or a singular moment in time. Making Jesus followers is a long-term process of diving deep into relationships in order to demonstrate with both actions and words the radical truth and love of Jesus Christ. It's about taking a whole bunch of bites a bunch of times in a row. No one bite matters more than another. It just matters that you took a bite today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. Now notice what this does for us. You see how it puts less pressure on you? You don't have to eat the whole elephant. Just take a bite. And then the next day, take a bite. And if you made any success with taking half a bite, then you made progress towards eating the elephant, right? A successful interaction with a non-believer is, or a believer for that matter, a successful interaction with any human being is any interaction that leads that person one step closer to Jesus. You don't have to get them all the way there. Just one step closer. That's it. If I can get the right page here. Now, what if every day, with every person, we just asked ourselves one simple question: how can I help this person follow Jesus better today? And then, life-changing moment, what if we actually did it? Followed through, no matter how big or even how small. Sometimes the most small, meaningless things have a profound impact. No worrying about fancy words like evangelism and discipleship, which have far too many syllables in them for me. No worrying about defining relationships or boundaries or trying to overcomplicate anything. Just how can I lead them one step closer to Jesus today? What would your marriage look like? If every morning you got out of bed and you looked at your wife and said, how can I lead her one step closer to Jesus today? And then could you imagine what would your marriage look like if she did that for you? And you both did that every day? What about your parenting? If you looked at your kids and just said, how can I help lead my son one step closer to Jesus today? What about at work? With your workmates? One step. How about with your boss or your pastor? Like someone that you think of should be building into you? What if you looked at your pastor at church and just thought, how can I help my pastor get one step closer to Jesus today? You know how much that would uplift him and help him lead other people one step closer to Jesus that day? And what's your relationship with your boss look like at work when you treat them in that manner? What about a random fisherman at a fishing tournament? Or on the water? Just a random guy. How can I help him get one step closer to Jesus? What would you say differently at weigh-in? What would you do differently when they hand you a microphone at the weigh-in? Are you really focused on fishing at that time? Is it really all about fishing? Or is it helping lead his people at that fishing tournament one step closer to Jesus that day? Or how about at a Blast and Cast event when you meet somebody new that's never been to an event before? One step Just one step. On Friday, and then on Saturday, one more step. And then on Sunday before you go home, one more step. And then about a week later, when it's time to follow up and see through and make sure there's a relationship there and that that person doesn't just drop off the face of the earth, make a phone call and take one more step. And then maybe a month later, invite them to go fishing with you and take one more step. When you step back and you consider eating the whole elephant, it just feels impossible. And I think that's how most people feel about evangelism. It just looks too big, too complicated, too impossible. Most people that I talk to have never actually led someone to Jesus before. But then when they actually do it one time, they keep doing it over and over and over. It becomes habitual because they realize it's not impossible. It's all a mental thing. When you get this idea of what success and failure is, as soon as you start seeing yourself as successful, it becomes possible for you. So if you redefine success as, did I take one bite today? Did I lead this person one step closer to Jesus? And then you take a step back and you start seeing that I did that 20 days in a row and now there's a whole hunk of this elephant's butt missing. And then you look up at the other end and you got Brad Sherman up there who also has a hunk off the shoulder missing. And then on the other side, Jared Langham over here, he's been eating on the other side too. And now you look like, hey, this elephant's getting eaten one bite at a time. But something's actually happened there. And then you know what happens is as a team, you start picking up the pace because you start getting excited about it and you start seeing results and you start seeing that, hey, I'm actually making a difference here. Something's happening. And then you go to Pastor Rob and you go, hey, I'm really excited about this. Can you pray with me about this guy? Now you got Pastor Rob involved in it and you have prayer involved in it. And then you have a whole team of blasting casters coming around and you're not doing it alone anymore. You see how evangelism starts looking differently when you just take one bite. It's so much easier, so much simpler. Even if you do mess up, and there's one day you forget to take a bite, or you get selfish and you concentrate on fishing and you just talk about fishing on the microphone at the tournament weigh-in. What do you do then? Have you failed? You know, that day, you just didn't take a step forward. Tomorrow, take a bite. Go one step closer then. Your success and your failure doesn't hinge on one conversation, one moment. It hinges on a long-term commitment and approach to relationship building, to valuing people, to just flat loving on people so that you lead them to Jesus over a period of years, not minutes. If you fall off the horse today, you can get back on it tonight with a simple phone call. It's that easy. Now, it may be a simple goal, and it may simplify your outlook on life, but it won't be easy. God never asks us to do anything easy. Because when we do easy things, we don't need Him. And God doesn't ask us to do things where we don't need Him. God always leads us to situations that require us to rely on Him and not our own strength. Something to remember in life. Now here's what's likely to happen. Because our God is intensely relational, we're going to have to learn to place a higher value on intense and deep relationships. And because our God loves sacrificially, He's going to ask us to value others more than ourselves. Because our God willingly took on the cross, He's going to show us our cross. And then He's going to ask us to willingly pick it up and to demonstrate a kind of love that can only come from God. And lastly, because our God values the communication of truth, He's going to use us to speak truth. Now, what do you get out of it? I think evangelism sounds like, it's all for others. And I think at its core, its motivation is, but you do get something out of it. Something very, very deep. You get a life that's productive because you're creating disciples. You get a life that's meaningful because it's being lived out within the context of a relationship with God and relationships with the people that He loves. And that context provides meaning for your life. And then you get a life that's abundant with the overflow of God's provision, because as you're doing what God asks you to do, He's the one that provides you with the ability to do it, and He provides in abundance when He provides. And if at the end of my time on this earth, I'm able to look back and say that my life was productive and meaningful and abundant, those are crowns I can lay at the feet of my Lord. I can die and say, I did my part. I did what you asked me to, God. And what more can I really ask for out of life?